Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to the Avon Fire Authority meeting for the 6th of November 2024 at Severn Park. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence.
I have received apologies from councillors Riddle, Saini, Hayward, Eddy and Williams, and James Mason, the independent person, couldn't come. There are a few members, you can see through a few empty seats, that haven't sent apologies but haven't arrived. So it may be they're going to arrive in the course of the meeting, but I'll update the attendance at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Item 2 is the emergency evacuation procedure. If I could ask the Chief Fire Officer to take us through that.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if it does operate, it will be for real. If you can exit the room using one of the exits and either go down the central stairs or the exits either end of the corridor and congregate to the front car park, please, for a roll call. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Item 3 is declarations of interest. None have been advised, but does anyone have any regarding the agenda? No. Okay, Chair's business.
Public access first received.
Chair's business. I'd like to welcome everyone to the meeting to confirm that this meeting is taking place at Severn Park Training Centre. We are recording the meeting for the public to view on the Avon Fire Authority YouTube channel. Just before I ask members to introduce themselves, can I just remind everyone to put their phones on silence? Okay, so I'm going to introduce myself. So I'm Councillor Ben Nutlin, the Chair of the Avon Fire Authority. If I go from my right, so Councillor Kent is next.
I'm Councillor Tim Kent from Bristol City Council.
Councillor Robin Moss from Bath and North East Somerset.
I'm Robert Taylor, Councillor for Western-super-Mare Central and North Somerset Council.
Councillor Paul May from Bath and North East Somerset.
Councillor Yasin Mahmood, Lawrence Hill, Bristol City Council.
Councillor Jane Stansfield, South Gloucestershire Council.
David Wilcox representing Lockleys Ward in the fine City and County of Bristol.
Perfect timing. Paul Coggin representing Hartcliffe and Witherwood Ward, Bristol.
Serena Ralston representing Clifton Down, Bristol.
Councillor Ron Hardy representing Emerson's Green for South Gloucester Council.
Councillor Kieran Connolly, North Somerset Council.
Thank you, members. So I'm just going to ask the officers to introduce themselves. So if we could start with the Chief.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members, colleagues. Simon Shilton, your Chief Forester and Chief Exec.
Good morning. Temporary Assistant Chief Fire Officer Paula Lyons, currently leading the Service Improvement Team.
Good morning, I'm Ian Potter, I'm Head of Service Transformation and the HMI CFRS SLO.
Good morning everyone, I'm Karen Shield and I'm the Culture Change Manager.
Good morning, Emma Bowen, Democratic Services Assistant.
Good morning, Amber Foreman, Temporary Director of Corporate Services.
Good morning, Chair, members, colleagues. Richard Welch, Assistant Chief Fire Officer.
Good morning, I'm Verity Lee, Statutory Finance Officer.
Good morning, Amanda Brown, Clerk to Avon Fire Authority.
Thank you, officers. I would like to bring to the members' attention some excellent work that's taken place across the service recently. So at the beginning of October, Bath firefighter Matt Parsons completed an epic 5-day challenge cycling 950 kilometres from Bath to Lyon in France, finishing with the Lyon Marathon. Matt took on this incredible challenge to raise funds for Cancer Research UK in honour of his wife Jess, who has bravely battled breast cancer. Thanks to the overwhelming support from everyone, Matt and Jess have raised an amazing £7,700 so far. So I think we can pass on our thanks to Matt and for the incredible work that he's done. On Saturday the 26th of October, firefighters took on a massive challenge at the Mole in Cribbs Causeway, where they climbed the height of Mount Everest using a fire engine ladder to raise money for two great causes: the Children's Hospice Southwest and the Firefighters Charity. Throughout the time they were there, they raised £2,564. Assistant Chief Fire Officer Luke Gazzard recently represented both the service and the National Fire Chiefs Council at the prestigious Science to the Station conference held in the National Emergency Training Session in Emmitsburg in America. At the event, Luke, along with colleagues, presented an insightful piece on the UK's approach to managing fire contaminants, something that we've led on in Avon recently. This topic is of a critical importance as it directly impacts the health, safety and well-being of firefighters both in the UK and around the world. The Service Head of Procurement, Tanya Nathan, was invited to speak at the Excellence in Blue Light Conference in Oxford in October about collaboration of procurement and supply chains. Tanya gave an excellent presentation alongside members of other blue light organisations from across the country. And the service has been shortlisted for the following awards. The Smarter Working Lives Award, the CRA Risk Management Awards, the Excellent in Fire and Emergency Awards, and so I'd also like to remind members that on the 5th of December this year, we have the Avon Christmas service, 6:30 at the Lord Mayor's Chapel on College Green in Bristol. I'd ask everyone to attend if possible. Okay, so just a little bit of business. Just to remind everyone that if there are any votes to take place today, I'll take any votes against, any abstentions, and votes for. So that's the end of the Chair's business. Item 6 is the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Avon Fire Authority meeting held on the 12th of June 2024. Is everyone happy with those? Yep, so I'll propose those. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Goggin. We have to vote this, yeah. So, any votes against? Any abstentions? Councillor, I think that's fair enough, Councillor Kent. And votes for? Brilliant, thank you. Right, so that takes us on to item 7. Obviously, we've got a good amount of minutes to approve there. Obviously, they have already been approved by their committees, so I'd like to approve them in bulk. There are confidential elements in there, so if you do want to raise anything in confidential session later on, can you just sort of put your hand up now? Otherwise, we'll approve them now. No?
So we're voting on the, in fact we don't need to vote because they've already been approved, but just to note the minutes of the AJOC committee on the 15th of March, the PRC committee on the 18th of April and the local pension board on the 25th of January, and also the confidential minutes of the PRC on the 18th of April. Is everyone content to note those?
Thank you, Amanda. Okay, so item 8 is the recruitment of a new Chief Fire Officer, Chief Executive and Director of Corporate Service. The Chief Fire Officer and the Clerk are to present.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start, if I may, and then I know the Chief is available to help as we go along. So my paper starts on page 45 of your pack. And the summary explains that the current Chief Fire Officer, Chief Executive Simon Shilton, has submitted his resignation to the Chair with a planned retirement date of the 31st of March 2025. I believe by that time he would have provided 32 years of service to the fire sector. The Chief Fire Officer has provided us with 6 months' notice to enable a full recruitment campaign to take place. In addition, the Director of Corporate Services left the service at the end of the summer, and in the interim period we have appointed, following a selection process, an interim temporary Director of Corporate Services. That appointment is in place for 6 months until a formal recruitment process can take place. So the purpose of the paper before you this morning is to go through the proposed timeline and process to fill those 2 critical posts. I'll come back to the recommendations at the end, but effectively it is to approve the process that we recommend for both these 2 posts. So if I now refer you please to page 46 of the bundle, under the background I've simply set out what it says in the Fire Authority Terms of Reference. So under the Fire Authority Terms of Reference, it is for me as clerk to be the lead officer for the recruitment process for a Chief Fire Officer, Chief Executive. The Chief himself will act as a technical advisor during that process, and in addition we will have a representative from HR. But the key difference between the 2 posts is that for the Chief Fire Officer it is the members who make the decision and the appointment. So the members are running the process with me, and then at the end of that selection process they make the decision. For the Director of Corporate Services role, there's a slight distinction in that currently our terms of reference don't include appointments for that role. They only reference appointments for assistant chiefs. But what your Chief Fire Officer has decided is that doesn't seem right because that's an important role. It's a member of the board and they should be treated in exactly the same way as an assistant chief. So the Chief Fire Officer has made the decision that members will also be involved in that appointment. But the slight distinction is for members of the board other than the chief, it's the chief who has the final decision but consults with and takes advice from members. So that's the slight distinction for that role. So hopefully that explains the background section. Under financial implications, I've set out there the current salary of the Chief Fire Officer, and you will see that the Director of Corporate Services salary is a percentage of that, hence they're linked and appear in the same table. They are engaged under different terms of reference. So at paragraph 4.2, you will see that I explain the Chief Fire Officer, Chief Executive is engaged under the Gold Book, whereas the Director of Corporate Services is engaged under the Green Book, save for salary, which is aligned to the Chief Fire Officer's pay award, as I explain in paragraph 4.2. If I can now refer you to page 47 of my paper, this is really the first recommendation to you members, which is that myself and the Chief have spoken to a specialist consultancy called Gatenbury Sanderson, who are an executive search company, to seek their advice regarding this critical appointment of a Chief Fire Officer. The reason we approached them is they have extensive experience in the public sector, and they are currently assisting a number of other fire and rescue services. So you'll see in the paper at 4.3 I've explained that they're assisting Derbyshire, East Sussex, an appointment for HMI CFRS, and they also have recently recruited for South Wales and for Cleveland FRS. So they have a lot of experience in this sector. I have at Appendix 1 set out the services they offer. It's quite a long list, and I think it would add a lot of value. That's at page 53 of the bundle. Now, clearly, they don't come free for all the work that they would do on our behalf. So at paragraph 4.4, I've explained that the cost to the Fire Authority would be 20k. That includes advertising. It's 18 plus advertising. And that is currently not in our revenue budget. However, I have checked with the Statutory Finance Officer and we do have a current underspend on the revenue budget, so she anticipates that it will be covered anyway because we are in the fortunate position of having an underspend at the moment. I can come back to that if members need. If I then take you over the page, please, to key considerations. The draft, if I go straight to paragraph 5.3, the draft job description for the Chief Fire Officer is at Appendix 2. You will note I haven't asked you to approve that today. I've asked you simply to note it. The reason being, we're going to be working with, if you appoint the executive consultants, we're going to be working with them on that, and the wording of that may well change. So it's to give you an idea of what it's likely to be. They will also work with us on adverts and the correct application forms and so on, and I think they will bring to us processes which improve what we've done previously. So that's why you're being asked to note that. You will see at paragraph 5.3, I explained that the role of the Chief Fire Officer is currently an operational uniformed position with the post holder providing operational response cover as part of the Principal Officer rota alongside Assistant Chief Fire Officers. But what we have said here is to explain that the Fire Authority will consider a wide pool of candidates with transferable experience and skills. And depending on the experience of the successful candidate, there may be a need for temporary arrangements to cover that Principal Officer rota. So in other words, if you were to recruit someone who didn't have that uniformed operational expertise, then we would have to make some sort of temporary arrangements to cover that and possibly even consider a restructure of the board in the future. At paragraph 5.4, I set out the challenges in the sector. You will all be aware of the immediate detriment issues relating to pension and potential tax changes which may be planned by the new government. And as a result of that, many senior fire officers are retiring from the sector. And therefore, we do feel that to attract candidates from a wide range of backgrounds, using an executive search company would be the best way ahead. We have suggested that we should attract applicants from people from sectors with experience in public safety or crisis management at or equivalent to level 4 incident management. So perhaps from an organisation which is also a category 1 responder under the Civil Contingencies Act. That doesn't mean that members couldn't consider people outside of that if they wanted to, but when we get to the shortlisting point, the agency will split out who's had that relevant experience and who hasn't. The selection process will, at the moment, but subject to advice, consist of application form and CV, a stakeholder engagement forum, which is with external stakeholders, an operational resilience business continuity exercise, and a formal presentation and interview. And the shortlisting process and the interviews will be run by a panel of elected members. So I will be picking on keen elected members to help be nominated for that process. If you go to the top of page 49, I've set out a draft timeline. This is very much a starter for 10 and may change a little bit. It depends how we get on. We've got some work to do with the agency if you appoint them. But you will see that currently we're planning towards the closing date of the 13th of December, shortlisting just before Christmas, and then the selection processes all to take place in the month of January, which should allow some wiggle room if someone's got to give 3 months' notice before starting work for us. So that's for the Chief Fire Officer. For the Director of Corporate Services, which you will see as a separate heading on page 49, this, as explained before, is also going to be a process involving elected members. The selection process will consist of an application form, a CV, a staff engagement forum, so more an internal forum, and then a formal presentation and interview. So a slightly shorter selection process. I am asking you to approve a number of documents, so they are at the appendices. So at Appendix 3, there is the job description, and the draft advert of Appendix 4 has been changed, and you should find on your tables an updated advert for the Director of Corporate Services role. Now, I apologise that this has only reached you today. What we realised after we'd used the last advert was that, in fact, that was for internal applicants for the temporary post and not the one we normally use to invite external applicants as well. So we've expanded upon the advert to give more information for people applying externally. The timeline is set out at 5.10, very similar timeline. In fact, hopefully the interviews will take place a little earlier on that one. The next section I need to bring to your attention is risks, at paragraph 6.1 on page 50. The risks that are seen in relation to these key appointments is that the current board has some members which are relatively new in post. So it's quite a young board. That is something to be considered when seeking to appoint a new chief. There are... Are you saying they're not young? Very rude. There is a recognition that there are challenges faced by the fire and rescue sector in recruitment, and your current chief has indicated that if needed, and I'm sure he'd rather not, but if needed, he would consider a limited extension in post with pension abatement if we needed to cover until we could find the right candidate. And the paragraph I'd really draw to your attention is 6.3. And what I've said here is there's a potential command gap and risk if the new Chief Fire Officer, Chief Executive, does not possess relevant experience of public safety or responding to critical incidents. So the selection panel will be asked to assess each candidate's experience and assess potential risk to the authority. So if the successful candidate doesn't have an operational background, bearing in mind we took away the position of Deputy Chief Fire Officer back in 2020, then transitional arrangements may be needed to cover the Principal Officer's rota until training is completed and passed to ensure operational competence, or indeed it might even be as extreme as a restructure of the board. It depends. We don't know. It depends who applies and what level of risk the fire authority feel comfortable with. So apologies for whizzing through that. If I go back to the recommendations, and then happy to take questions, and of course Simon can add anything I've missed. So on page 45, the recommendations are for the Fire Authority to note the job description for a new Chief Fire Officer, Chief Executive, which is subject to review by an executive search company. Approve the use of an executive search company to support the selection process for a new Chief Fire Officer, Chief Executive. Approve the job description for a new Director of Corporate Services, which is in your pack. Approve the advert, that's the new advert on your desk, and selection process for a new Director of Corporate Services, and instruct me as your clerk to convene a panel of elected members for each process. So we're going to have 2, so I'm going to need 6 members altogether to help with these 2 processes. And I can't interchange them. Once you're in one, you're in one. So you have to sort of see the whole process through, which makes sense to everyone. I know there's a number of you who've done this for us before, so same again. Simon, did you want to add anything before we take questions?
No, thanks, Amanda. I'll just take some questions first and then see where we go from there.
Paul?
Just a brief question. We're obviously using the Gatton B. Sanderson for the CFO. Would they not have given us a discount to do both posts?
I think they were keen to be considered for both. We were just conscious of the expense because normally the fee is linked to the salary, and these are both, you know, big level, board level salaries. So it was felt better, and we also felt that there weren't the same challenges in attracting applicants for that role as there were for the Chief Officer. So did you want to add to that at all?
No, it was really around managing the cost, really, of using a third party, and also around considering capacity within the organisation as well. So capacity to run two roles side by side would be a big ask. So to seek the support for the Chief Fire Officer was felt the highest of priorities in terms of that additional capacity to run that.
Thanks, and I'm happy to volunteer for either of the panels.
Thank you, Paul. I've got Councillor Moss, then May.
Thanks very much. Thank you for the paper, Amanda. But I've just got a question on recommendation D on the selection process, and it's particularly around the scheduling and the timetabling. Yes. It's unusual to actually have 2 posts come up at the same time, particularly one as the Chief Fire Officer. And there is an interlink in, of course, that the Director of Corporate Services is a decision by the Chief Fire Officer. So what we'll be saying is that this will be an appointment made by the outgoing Chief Officer, but the new Chief Fire Officer will be coming and be responsible for the evaluation and the probation period. So I'm not suggesting a delay, but am I suggesting a delay? I'm not sure. Yes. I'm certainly saying that we should be considering and noting the fact that there is an issue with the timetabling and a judging on risks with that, if you see what I'm saying.
Simon's going to pick that up.
Yeah, as part of that consideration in relation to the slight change in the appointment for Director of Corporate Services, in the Constitution, as Amanda referenced earlier on, it's not referenced within there in terms of appointments at board level. So that's why we've included to try and manage that risk that you've identified, included members' involvement in that process as well, so you get that consistency going through.
Councillor May.
Thank you, Chair. I want to congratulate you on the quality of this report. Thank you for that. I think it's really important, in view of item 12 on the agenda, that we do go for a Chief Fire Officer stroke Chief Executive, because the issues have been with this fire authority for quite a while now, and we're still under a lot of pressure from the inspectorate around our performance. And under those circumstances, having perhaps a different approach, might be a really, really sensible way to move forward. And in particular, I think the use of external appointment consultants will get my full support, whether it's that one or any other one, because there's lots of them out there. But I do think I would also like somewhere within the papers, because I've looked through in a lot of detail around the HMI reference, because you picked up culture, which is very nice to see, but it's something whether we could in actual fact build in something about getting good or outstanding at a reasonable period of time, because I think it is absolutely crucial to the services that we're providing for the public, that we actually do bring the authority up that level to actually be satisfactory moving forward. So if at all possible you could build that in, I think that would be really worthwhile.
Subject to anything Simon's going to add, I know one of the recommendations is that you do a candidate pack, and as part of that pack you have a letter from the chair, which I haven't discussed in much detail yet with Councillor Nutland, but the idea would be that that letter draws out the main issues facing the authority, so it's not buried in the detail in the pack. But I agree, it needs to appear in several places, reference to the inspectorate. But yes, absolutely, we pick up on that for the chair's letter.
And I am aware that at least 2 other fire authorities have appointed a chief executive, so we're not going to be just on our own doing that.
Before I go to David, I'm just going to make a point here, and actually Councillor May does make some excellent points on this, and it's a discussion that we've had in person and online in terms of how we approach this process. I think as a service we're always looking to be as dynamic and progressive and forward-looking as possible. So the ability for us to start this process and get to a stage whereby we bring in the best candidate that we possibly can do with the relative experience to serve the people of Avon is the most important factor. Not wanting to preempt Ian or Karen's reports later on, I will say in terms of our HMIC FRS investigation, which you did touch on, we are making progress there, and I think it's goes to the credit of not only the senior leadership board, but also the chief in particular in terms of the progression that we are making, that actually the service, in my opinion, will be in a much better position when, unfortunately, Simon does step down than when we found it. So we are making progression there, and obviously Karen and Ian can expand on that later on. But I just wanted to add that into the conversation now. David.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Simon for his years of service and wish him well in his retirement. But I do have a question. I'd like to quantify how big the actual recruitment pool is for the Chief Fire Officer. I can understand Assistant Chief Fire Officers or Deputy Chief Fire Officers wanting to apply. How big actually physically is that number? And also, if we are considering recruitment from other Class 1 organisations, I think that's the correct term, how big that pool is, please.
So, strange enough, Councillor has some statistics here from the last Brigade Managers Survey, which was taken place in 2022. This is a couple of years old now. Notwithstanding any structural changes that might have occurred, but of chief officers, there are 48 chief officers across the country. There are 43 deputy chief officers, and there are 84 assistant chief officers since 2022 across the fire sector from a fire background that could possibly be eligible to apply for the role. Hopefully that helps. And of course, the paper suggests that also we widen that opportunity for authority to consider a much bigger pool of candidates should it so wish to do so.
It might help. I also attended a women, senior women. I thought I pressed the button, I didn't press it properly. I attended a senior leaders in fire networking event, well, the first of its type recently, and there were 2 recently appointed new chief fire officers who were both females, one from outside the sector and one ex-police officer. So it just goes to show that change is starting to happen, and you will have the widest pool available to you to consider, and that's why using the agency is a good idea, and they're very experienced at recruiting across that sector who has relevant experience in public safety, responding to incidents and that sort of thing.
I think it would also be fair to say that it is a wider pool that we can tap into, but it's also a very small pool to begin with. In the, if you look at our population as a country, 65 million, there's 84 individuals that are probably that could have a credible application. So, yeah, widening that pool is important, but also let's not forget that the reason those individuals get to those positions is because they are very talented, competent, with the skill set to be able to do the job correctly. So let's just remind ourselves of that. I've got Robert Payne and then
yeah, it all seems fine to me. I was just going to ask how you came about selecting Gayton B. Sanderson. Did you compare it to other companies and, well, to compare their services they provide and the costs as well?
I did quite extensive. My button's not staying pressed on. It lights up and then goes back off. So we'll see how it goes. If not, I'll shout. Yes, I did quite a lot of research. They popped up at the top of the list simply because of the amount of recruitment campaigns they'd already done in the sector. The benefit of using them also is they've got a framework, a procurement framework in place, and we can do a direct award without having to get numerous quotes based on their expertise, which I set out in the financial section. So I can explore further if you want me to. I'm just conscious that that might potentially add more delay, but I'm in your hands.
Councillor Ralston.
That was the point I was going to make actually as well, is which other recruitment consultants you looked at. But it also, that I suppose it is more complex because of frameworks, but I suppose for value for money, that's just one factor. But yeah, it would be interesting to know if you had considered others. I suppose the other question, which is startlingly obvious, and forgive me, I'm still relatively new, is what are the opportunities for internal promotion? I'm assuming that there's an opportunity for people within the service to apply. So that was the other question, really. And I suppose my concern for any organisation, and I work for some large organisations too, is when you have two very senior roles becoming vacant at the same time and two senior new starters at the same time, and how you might mitigate for that, I suppose. So, yeah.
Okay, so in terms of the first part of the question.
Sorry, my button's not working now. So in terms of the first part of the question, if I let the Chief go on that, and can you pick up the second part?
Yeah, there are candidates internally who may fit the eligibility to apply, so we're not closed to that as an opportunity for internal staff. But of course, it's important that the authority get an opportunity to assess all suitable candidates. So it doesn't mean to say that it's closed to internal applicants.
In terms of value for money, I can confirm that the figure quoted is quite significantly less than which is allowed under the framework. So negotiations have taken place. So although, yes, it is a lot of money, the percentages that can be charged are actually much higher.
Before I go to Councillor Hardy, we'll just pick up on one of the points whereby actually one of our current Assistant Chief Fire Officers was promoted internally. So, we were always looking from an Avon point of view to put the opportunities out to all candidates, but there is a track record that we do promote internally and bringing people from outside, so it's making sure that we keep that balance at the end of the day. Councillor Hardy.
Sorry, there was one other question about mitigating risk for when you get two very senior appointments at the same time.
Yeah, I think that comes down to, obviously, the preferred candidates at the end of the process of how we mitigate and manage that risk. So it's something that's in the paper itself to be cited on. There are some risk factors associated, which is around, obviously, we won't know what that risk looks like until we've gone through the selection process, looked at the applicants and the candidates and those that are shortlisted, and eventually those that you select as your preferred candidates for the roles, really, as to understand what that risk is. But understandably, yes, there are risks in two senior posts coming in at the same time, but depending on where they come from and their background would sort of potentially mitigate that risk.
I suppose, sorry, I'm being nuisance here, but there's no, I think Rob alluded to this.
There's no chance, it probably sounds a bit idealistic or naive, but say you could stagger it so they don't start at exactly the same time, but I'm guessing you probably have assessed that thoroughly.
Yeah, we've got the temporary appointment in relation to the Director of Corporate Services was 6 months temporary. which the substantive recruitment, aligns to that as well. The reason why I opened that up to a 6-month temporary is to allow that opportunity for internal staff to gain that relevant experience and exposure, so that when we do open it out, obviously that we're managing a risk as far as reasonably possible, notwithstanding what the outcome of that would be. There is, of course, the option to stagger that. Absolutely, there's still the option for the authority to stagger that, the 2 appointments side by rather than be side by side.
Right, go to Councillor Hardy and then I'll go to Councillor Moss. Obviously,
Our job is to scrutinise.
hopefully it stays on. Our job is predominantly to scrutinise decisions of officers, and if we don't feel that we are happy to run a dual process, then we can stagger it. Obviously, I think everyone here understands the abilities and talents of both Amanda and Simon in terms of making decisions. And so I think if we are going to go down the suggestion that we might stagger it, we might want to have that conversation now so that we can make a decision today to allow them to go away and do the research in terms of how we might do that process. So, Ron, is your point on in terms of the process?
No, I think there's a real danger with sitting here and being the last one to ask a question, because all the answers have already come. So mine was very much around the criteria that we used to select the recruitment agency. I think that's been responded to satisfactorily. Thanks, Ben.
Councillor Moss.
Mine's doing the same, yes, switching on and switching off. I'll make a proposal, and I appreciate it's slightly difficult when you've got the 2 people actually involved in this, so please feel free to put your fingers in your ears at this point. If we have made a temporary appointment that the Chief Fire Officer is comfortable with, then there is no detriment, surely, in delaying the substantive appointment until there is a new Chief Fire Officer in place who can then take responsibility for their director. And throwing it out there, I'd like to propose that as something that officers should be looking at.
So, so do we have a seconder to that proposal? Okay.
No, we think this through properly. So what
I will say is that in terms of, as Amanda stated, the corporate services position is made by the Chief Fire Officer. It's also made in accordance with members and advice from members. So you do have that. You have that dual function in terms of a decision by the Chief, but also have member engagement. Now, obviously, members come and go off this body as well. So a member who's involved in that process could also leave before that person actually takes up post. So there's also the factor that in terms of accordance and correspondence to members might not be in position at the same time. So in terms of the relationship, the questions around the relationship working between the Director of Corporate Services and a new Chief Officer, which they haven't appointed. Okay.
Not arguing with what Simon was suggesting. All I'm saying is that is a satisfactory solution rather than being an ideal one. And if there is the option to stagger the 2 appointments, then surely that is a more ideal solution.
I think in terms of the risk you identified there around 2 new appointments, that risk would still exist because you'll have a new Chief Fire Officer. And then shortly after, you'll have a new Director of Corporate Services. So you'll still have relatively new members of the board, no matter how much you stagger it, unless you stagger it for a 12-month period as an example, to stabilise the board. I think one of myself and the clerk consideration was, as I said earlier on, was to ensure that members are engaged in that process for Director of Corporate Services, so you can also have that assurance and that confidence, if you like, that we're making the right appointment in terms of the level of experience and expertise at board level, given you've got the relatively two new members that are likely to join there. And as the paper said, we've got a relatively young board that's not in terms of any competency level. Please don't misquote me on that one, please. But we have got a relatively young board, so it's probably a good time actually for them to form their position in taking the organisation forward.
Okay, Councillor May's got a question.
Chair, not a proposal from me, but can I just suggest that because we make up the 4 unitary authority areas, that on the appointment, using members of the fire authority on the appointments, it'd be good if we can get a balance between the 4 authorities.
That's a given.
Not
I
as a
try
proposal.
I try really hard
sure.
every time. The
Yeah.
issue that we have always, so for example, I always like to have a female member as well. We only have 2 female members here who are very busy ladies. So it's very hard sometimes to get your dream team. So different parties, different UAs, females. I always really try. It's always based on member availability, but I would do my absolute best.
That's why I said it's not a proposal.
Yeah.
But I'm more than happy to volunteer because I would love to be involved in this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor May. Councillor Mohammed?
Thank you. What I'm proposing is, as it looks like we are complicated now, as we have now acting director of corporate here, is there any possibility as today to propose herself? Is she willing to do that job? I know we look like fairness process, the recruitment, to offer that job rather than taking that longer process.
No, we can't do that. Okay, so we've had a bit of a discussion around this. I want to give fair process to Robin's proposal because obviously we didn't get a seconder, but is everyone, because obviously we want to make sure this is a fair process, do we want to go back in terms of discussing the staggering, or are we happy to run it, both appointments alongside each other? Councillor Stansfield?
Well, from my point of view, I agree with what Simon said. I can't really see a lot of point in staggering it unless it's a really significantly long staggering, because it takes about a year, I reckon, when you're in a new job to really understand it and get on top of it. So you're talking a year delay for the second appointment if you do that. So I'd say go ahead and get both of them as fast as possible, which is basically what the paperwork is saying. So that's my point of view.
Okay, thank you. Sina?
All I'd say is I think we should crack on. I think you're right, having heard Simon's answer, but just to bear in mind those risks and, to be very clear that could be an issue and that we're mitigating for it and doing what we can. And if the members are supporting you in the process, then hopefully make it more watertight. I'm not saying you haven't got the expertise, but yeah, just to note the risk, I'd say, really, formally.
And I think it's one of those issues whereby there's always risk in any employment, whether it's a high-paying job or a low-paying job. And it's the individual that comes into it. And obviously, in terms of our service, it's a service built around risk. So it's we're in a situation whereby we can mitigate the risk as much as we possibly can do, but we can't totally eliminate it. And I think that's a fair process that's a fair point to make. So the recommendations have been read by the clerk. So. Do we need them reading again, or is everyone happy with them? We just go to the vote in terms of the approval? Your proposal? Yeah. And can I have a seconder? Councillor Hardy? Okay, so any votes against? Any abstentions? Votes for? Brilliant. Thank you, members.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes us on to item 9, which is the update on governance review and the refresh of the Constitution, including the new member officer protocol, which is the Chief Fire Officer and the clerk to present.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do my best with the red light's on at the moment, so we'll see how we get on. Okay. Now, I must apologise to you. This is a very dry report, so I'm going to try and make it as exciting as possible. It also has a staggering number of appendices, so you've got 8 appendices to this paper. I'm really sorry, but I had to bring all those appendices to you, so I apologise for the size of your bundle. So if I could take you please to page 75 of your bundle, which is the first page of my report. It's called Update on Governance Review and Refresh of Constitution, including a new member officer protocol. So as I've explained in the summary, This dates back to your extraordinary Fire Authority meeting back on the 25th April 2023. You considered the report of an independent governance review and you accepted all 12 recommendations. So we implemented some of those recommendations straight away, and then I agreed to take away a second phase of work. So basically, this report deals with that second phase. I provided an update to the AGM in June, and this work, I'm pleased to report, will have completed all the recommendations of the governance review. So we will be there, hurrah, and I can get on with other things, so that would be super. So I'm asking you to note completion of the recommendations of the governance review, approve amended or new chapters of the Avon Fire Authority Constitution, which are at appendices 1 to 8. Now, if I can draw to your attention, you've probably spotted this already, but 3 documents are a complete rewrite. So in other words, no track changes because the whole document is new. So I've crossed those to indicate for you. So it's the Draft Member Officer Protocol, Appendix 1, the Draft Officer Employment Procedure Rules, Appendix 4, and the Draft Whistleblowing Policy at Appendix 6. And that was the work of my colleague, Karen Schell. Thank you, Karen. So we're going to go through all of the appendices very briefly, but the others just have track changes, and I'll explain why as we go on. But those 3 are a complete rewrite, which is why there are no track changes showing. And then the final recommendation is, please, will you delegate to me authority in consultation with the Fire Authority Chair to make any minor changes to the Constitution to correct errors or cross-referencing. This is because we're reformulating the Constitution on our website, where I'm going to have a new index and all these chapters underneath. And as we do that process, we might find the cross-referencing isn't quite right, and I don't want to have to keep coming back to you to correct factual inaccuracies. So if you could give me that delegated authority, that would be appreciated. So if I won't start with the background because I've just explained that to you. So if I can take you to page 77, which is key considerations, you will see at paragraph 5.2 that I had a table which I presented to the AGM, and I had in that table a list of those recommendations which had been completed and 4 which were left in progress. Now, the problem is that recommendation number 5 about the Constitution was the biggest recommendation of all of them. So that's the one that's caused a lot of headaches and a lot of work. So I'm reporting to you now on the 4 in the in-progress part of that chart. If I then take you, please, to paragraph 5.4, I'm proposing to you a new member officer protocol. Now, some members will recall that after our audit committee meeting on the 20th of September, we had a workshop with Bethan Evans, who was absolutely excellent, and everybody who came to that event really enjoyed it. And together, we worked on what a protocol should contain and how to approach it. And after that big workshop, she produced the draft protocol. Now, I then discussed that with a Constitution Working Group. So the Constitution Working Group comprises the Fire Authority Chair, the Vice Chair and the political group leaders. And we met online on the 16th of October and we went through all these chapters, but in particular this Member Officer Protocol at Appendix 1, and they were content with that document. And I sent the document out to all members with a deadline to respond. I didn't get any feedback that anyone was unhappy of any aspects, but of course we can go through that today. So I'm proposing, please, that we approve now Appendix 1, which is the rewrite of the Member Officer Protocol. Would it be helpful if I pause there and then we take each section? Are there any points on the Member Officer Protocol before I move on? Serena?
I just think it's excellent having read it, and thank you as well for the workshop. It's really good.
Oh, super. Thank you very much.
I think I can speak on behalf of all members to thank you, Amanda, and Bethan for all the work that you've put into this. It's incredibly hard, and I think the general consensus was you didn't get a reply because it was an excellent piece of work. So,
thank you. Okay, good. Right, so recommendation 5 was to remove or rewrite sections of the Constitution. So I'm now on page 78 of my report. And I've explained at paragraph 5.8 that some chapters just needed a light refresh, which was with track changes to update terminology and so on. And some chapters, the three I've alluded to, required a full rewrite. We did hold the Constitution Working Group on 16th October, so we have met, as a result of that working group, and thank you for those of you who joined that, we went through a couple of minor changes, so it's really helpful to have that feedback. So the appendices you've got now are the ones with those added amendments made, so I really appreciated that feedback. And at 5.10, I've reiterated there that I do need delegated authority and consultation with the chair to make any other minor corrections that I spot as we go along. Now, at paragraph 5.11, I set out the new constitution structure where I explain all the other appendices. I don't propose to go through these as individual documents, but Appendix 2 is track changes to the introduction. Appendix 3 is track changes to the standing orders, and you will see there on page 79 an explanation of those key changes. I've told you that I'm going to make one factual correction to the Fire Authority Terms of Reference, which still refers to the Police and Crime Commissioner as a member, but they no longer are, so I'll take that out. We're not going to update the contract procedure rules yet because the legislation which we were expecting has been delayed, so that's coming in next February, so I will bring that to the February meeting for you. Over the page, on page 80, we did a complete rewrite of the Officer Employment Procedure Rules at Appendix 4. Most of you will have noticed we now have an employment lawyer in-house 2 days a week, and I worked very closely with Nina on that document because we had to reflect various different terms and conditions of employment. So the gold book versus the green book versus so on for myself, and variety of statutory officers. So it was trying to get a set of procedure rules which applied to everyone. So that was quite a detailed piece of work. Indemnities for members and officers has been updated at Appendix 5, and the whistleblowing policy was a complete rewrite by Karen to comply with legislation at Appendix 6, and that links in with her report that she's going to present to you in the agenda. And then finally, the definitions chapter was updated at Appendix 8. So before I move on to recommendation 7, dealing with the Constitution chapters, did anybody have any comments on those? Paul?
Right, it's the whistleblowing policy. Can I jump straight to that one? There's reference there. You may also approach a member of the fire authority. Normally, it would be one or two named members of the fire authority, I would have thought. Otherwise, that's so vague that then doesn't actually, who do you go to? It's better to have that as a named person or two named people within the fire authority.
It's probably logically the chair or the vice chair then, it would sound. I don't know how you feel about that, but I'm happy to consider that amendment, and I can discuss it with Karen offline. Is that all right?
Can I suggest we take that away, and just then we can get you a proper response on it. But I think both me and Paul will always be happy to take any whistleblowing allegations, not only seriously, but obviously confidentially on behalf of the authority. But obviously, members have their own, they sit as members. They're also their own station champions. So obviously, we're in our stations constantly all the time. So if there are any issues, then we can always pick them up. And me and Paul are always happy to discuss those with members or members of staff.
Yes, I take your response, Chair. All I would suggest that perhaps sometimes it's better, because you're part of the system, if you like. For the staff, it may be safer if it's somebody who's not the chair or deputy chair.
Okay, we'll certainly take that suggestion offline if that's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, there we go. And then Ron.
So mine just relates to the standing order. It's on page 102. It's about non-attendance of members. So I just wanted to pick up on the track change around sporadically fails over a longer period of time, because my failed lawyer in me is thinking that's quite difficult to say what that actually is, because it's not a defined number. A bit like, if you attend once every 6 months, that's nice and easy. So I'm just wondering if we need to rethink that phraseology, because it's quite hard to actually use.
Exactly what you mean. Can you remind me the page number, please? Sorry.
Yeah, it's 102, and it's SO10, and it's paragraph B.
It wouldn't surprise you, there was quite a lot of discussion about this at the Constitution Working Group. And the scenario we were trying to fix, and I don't know whether we managed it or not, is that without the sporadically or similar words fails over a period of time, you could end up with someone just under the time limit suddenly attending one meeting so that they can't be complained about, and then not attending for another 5 months, and then attend one meeting. Do you see? And it was just this sort of trying to work out how you could still raise this with the unitary authority if there was a sporadic absence as opposed to a consistent. So it was just to deal with the fact that at the moment, I think the wording is, so SO10A, where a member fails throughout a period of 3 months from the date of their last attendance to attend any meeting, then the political group leader shall be advised. And then the period of 6 months would allow me to go to their unitary authority. But I think we added the sporadically fails over a longer time to deal with the scenario where just before the 6 months expires, they come to one, and then they don't come for months again, and so on and so. But we added as the protection for that I could only do so after consultation with the Fire Authority Chair and the Chief Fire Officer. So it's not me having some sort of vendetta against a member. I discuss it with other people and say, what do you think? So happy to look at the wording if you'd rather that's worded in some other way. But that's where the conversation centred. Does that?
It's not a hill I'm going to die on. I mean, it's fine. I'm just mindful that the two statements conflict, right? If you fail to attend a meeting once in 6 months, and then you're saying, well, actually, it's not okay to attend that one meeting because you've been a bit naughty and you've waited to that 6 months. I just don't think it's going to be actionable. That's all I'm saying. But the only way you solve it, right, is you have a longer period of time with more frequency. So it's not once every 6 months; it's 3 times in 12 months. You know, that's the way you solve it.
Yes.
But it's not a hill to die on. I just wanted to flag that I think that's a bit of a challenge, really.
Okay, that's fine.
I will say, I think in terms of that discussion that we had in terms of the Constitutional Working Group on this, is that I think we're trying to cover all bases with multiple scenarios. And it was a case that obviously Amanda's picked up whereby actually we try to get that triple lock-in between the clerk, the chair and the chief fire officer. So, not to say that we would, but if one of us did have a vendetta, then the other two could cancel one out. I don't like to think that the clerk would ever have a vendetta, nor a chief fire officer, nor myself. But it's we can take that away and maybe work on it if you want to just see if we can tweak the words on it in terms of.
I don't really have a solution for you, is what I'm saying. It's either not, it's a conduct issue, right? It's basically what it is. And sometimes trying to tackle conduct in standing orders is tough.
Yeah.
And touch wood, this hasn't occurred very often. So I'm relatively comfortable that it's not relied on that much. But I felt that the wording could be extended a little bit to give us a bit more flexibility. I agree that it's not perfect, but if you're happy, maybe we'll see how it goes. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
I think Councillor Hardy had a question.
I'm sorry, Ben. Why is the PCC not? Why are we removing reference to the PCC? Should we not retain reference to the PCC, leaving it up to the PCC's decision whether he or she is on the fire authority? But we leave it within the standing order so that the PCC can attend if they want to.
The PCC is mentioned in that context that you've just mentioned, if they are. For example, in the standing orders it mentions that the PCC wouldn't be a member of a committee. They'd only come to firefight. So those references remain. The only bit that's coming out is in the introduction where the statement is made, the fire authority comprises 20 elected members and a PCC, which is factually inaccurate now because there is no longer one. But the provisions of the standing orders allow for there to be one, and references to PCC remain. It's only where it was factually inaccurate in the introduction I need to take it out. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, super. That's all right, don't worry. Yeah, I was very careful to keep all the, because we when we introduced the PCC previously, I had to go through the standing orders and add reference to them wherever needed, and I was very careful to keep all that in. So that's still in there. It's just the inaccurate bit in the introduction to the Constitution.
Yes, it's really just about leaving it in there somewhere, Amanda. So
in case we get one again.
If the PCC decides at some point in the future, says, "Oh, I've got loads of time now. I'll attend all the Avon Fire Authority meetings." They can do so.
I totally agree, Ron. Thank you.
Councillor Goggin?
Yeah, I was just going to say in response to the points and so forth about the PCC, I think, Simon, you reported to us at a meeting that you'd spoken to Claire, and at the moment she wasn't intending on joining.
That's correct. That's correct, yes. In sort of informal conversations, that's what she's in our meetings, and I think also the chair's also had a meeting and a similar sort of conversation has taken place.
Yeah, I will say that both me and Simon do have regular meetings with Claire, and while she's not going to apply to be a member of this body, she's open to the idea of considering it in the future, but we do have a very close working relationship with this PCC. Any questions? Any further questions?
I haven't finished my paper.
Okay.
So sorry, Dan.
Thank you, Amanda. Just following up on Councillor Bromley's point earlier. So we do record meeting attendance as part of the authority. If we just use a percentage rather than the kind of 6 month period sporadically fails to, unless given a perfectly valid kind of reason for them still issues, should we expect members to be attending 50% or more?
It's a very interesting proposal, not one that was considered.
Also goes off. But thank you.
Do any other members have a view about? I mean, I'm just conscious that some members have working commitments which conflict with meetings more than others, and so I don't want any member to feel disadvantaged by provisions in standing orders. So I've just got to be a bit careful. However, that wasn't discussed at the Constitution Working Group, so happy to open the floor if anybody else wants to comment on that.
I'm not sure it solved the sporadic issue either, basically is what I'm saying.
Okay, well, we have to come up with some sort of decision today, so it's... Yeah.
Maybe we can... We've done quite a lot of work on this up until today. Maybe we can get to a point today where we're happy to see how it goes. And then as I'm coming back to you with a paper in February with the new contract procedure rules, if we can develop and think about it in the meantime, and maybe if we decide to develop new wording, I can present it to you then. Is that all right? Super.
Yeah, Councillor Hardy?
Yeah, it may be a view that not a lot of people share, but as far as I'm concerned, if someone's committed to sit on something like the Avon Fire Authority or any other committee within their local council, as soon as they commit to that, they hold a responsibility to at least appear or give proper apologies that are actually valid. You know, the trouble is, if somebody says, "Oh, well, it's quite a long way to Avonmouth, so I can't really make it this week or any other week, and I'll pitch up to the headquarters once every 6 months if I feel like it," I don't think that's a commitment, and I don't think they should be making that commitment. Perfectly reasonable that they shouldn't show up, but they shouldn't make that commitment to the rest of the fire authority, because it's completely unfair. So, you know, I'm perfectly relaxed with saying if people don't show up for 3 months or maybe 6 months, it's kind of up to us. That we should say, well, actually, you're showing no commitment, so I'm sorry. We'll see if we can get someone that has some level of commitment.
Yeah, I take your point. I think it's also fair to say that I don't think we have that problem with this body, with these councillors, and everyone tries to get to every single meeting that they possibly can do. But obviously, people do lead different lives at the end of the day, and the way that this has been written is that we're trying to incorporate and cover almost all the bases that we possibly can do. So I've got Councillor Goggin, then Councillor Stansfield, and then Councillor Moss.
I think actually, in fairness,
Robbins first?
Moss
Okay, Councillor Moss, Goggin, Councillor Stansfield.
Sorry, Paul, butting in. Not want to disagree with Ron at all, and as the person who's probably having to come the furthest distance, I think, from Radstock to anybody else, I think we need to remind ourselves about what we're trying to achieve here, and that is to have the maximum attendance possible at these meetings and to encourage that, because I don't think we actually really have any enforcement powers if someone just turns around and says, I'm not coming along. That's, so that's not happening here. It hopefully won't happen in the future, but remind ourselves what powers we have here. I think it also fits in with a discussion that we need to have at some point with the government's announcement that meetings like this can take place online as well as face-to-face. And there are certainly some briefings, training sessions and similar that can quite successfully take place online, whereas this kind of meeting, to have this kind of discussion, is not that successful online. So the combination of what are we trying to achieve, getting people here, and making sure we put the measures in place that if people have to travel, it is for a purpose rather than the sake of travelling, I think are the two bits together.
Just going to come in there before we go to Paul. Yes, you're absolutely right. It's also a case that we do need a change of legislation before we can even contemplate holding these meetings virtually. I think predominantly most of the member briefings that we do get are done online. That's not only for ease of access to members, it's also a cost-saving initiative whereby, if everyone's claiming for their expenses to get here, that's gone straight away. I think personally, in terms of the direction that we're going in terms of even contemplating online meetings, that will be a long time away in terms of what's currently going through Parliament in terms of getting that legislation through. It's not even in its draft stages yet. So it's something to consider, but we're nowhere near getting to the point whereby we can actually identify a meeting whereby we will be able to do it online.
At the LGA conference, I thought it was going to be a statutory instrument rather than primary legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Councillor, I totally agree with you. We want to make it easier for members to attend meetings because we don't want empty seats. So I want to work with you with those LGA recommendations. There will be some sort of legislation that needs to be passed, whether it's primary or secondary, I don't know yet. I don't know the detail. So once that's passed, but it will also require investment from the authority because we don't have the technology, and that's the bigger question because at the moment, you're one of the ones who's disadvantaged because you're travelling the most. So it will certainly be a cost saving in some respects for mileage and so on. I don't know if you claim mileage. But also, at the moment, we try and spread meetings around. If we're going to set up technology in one place, we probably need to have meetings in one place where that technology is, because I'm not convinced it's going to be portable. So there's lots of consideration. I'd love to work with you on this. I think I mentioned that to you previously, that if we could work together to try and find a solution which would work for the Fire Authority, I think that would be very helpful.
Can I just thank you for that, Amanda. I certainly wasn't suggesting that we turn around to you and say sort out the technology by next week, Amanda, because we know that isn't going to be possible. But it is in the pipeline, how long that pipeline is, and it wouldn't be right not to reference that and mention that.
Councillor Goggin?
Just responding in general to this debate, obviously a lot of things were considered at the working group, and I'm quite happy with the current or the proposed wording because it does give a little bit of leeway. And the reason I say that is I think we've all identified that there are, for example, we could have a member that either has caring concerns ongoing or suddenly becomes a carer. We could have single parents or heaven forbid somebody ends up in a coma for 3 months. And if we tie ourselves down to, or if you don't come to 3 meetings, you're out. I don't think in my 7 years on the Fire Authority anybody has ever been removed anyway. So it may be that allowing the leeway for the chair and the chief, I think it sort of captures, the best we can.
I think it was Jane as well. Sorry, Jane, you've probably forgotten what your question is.
No, it was more of a statement really around what's been being said, and it links with what everyone's just been saying. Ron was talking about commitment, and we need to be committed when we're elected, is that the right word? When we're put onto the fire authority. And I think there's a difference between being committed and not being able to attend that needs to be reflected in the wording, because at the same time as wanting people to attend, we also want the representatives, the members that sit around this table, to be as broad a range of people as possible. And from my point of view, I work, my employer's very good about it. They recognise that if you're doing council work, etc., they make allowances, but it's still not always possible to make allowances on the right days. So I think we have to just be cognizant of the fact, like you said, there's only 2 females on here. You know, we've got to be cognizant of the fact that to get that wide range of representatives here, we can't be like, you've got to be here so many meetings. This is a working day at the moment, for example. You know, they all are, I think. So, I mean, with the way it's worded at the moment, it does allow for that range. So,
and I think if we do move towards online meetings, that will hopefully encourage more people from different backgrounds and different responsibilities to come along. Super, thank you, Jane.
Selina?
Just one issue. It is related, but not specifically in the wording. I really do think we need to think about location for travel. There's some people who don't have cars, and we have to think about public transport where these meetings are located. It's extremely difficult, for instance, for people to get here if they don't drive. That would be an issue for some members, so just bear in mind.
Ron?
Yeah, thanks for your comments, Jane. And I think relevant to this is what I was really saying is that if somebody can't come to the meetings or chooses not to come, that at least they should offer their apologies and explain why, rather than just people not showing up. I think that's really where I was coming from. I wasn't sort of trying to say, well, you know, once you've joined, you've got to be here every time. Otherwise, you know, we'll take you out the back and deal with you in a proper way. So it was, but it's very much that if somebody's not going to come to a meeting and they've got a perfectly valid reason, let us know, and we, yeah, if we can help, we can help, can't we?
Yeah, what I would say, you know, that's not our official policy. Take members out the back and to sort them out. If they don't, I think it's fair to say that we will always want maximum attendance that we possibly can do, but we understand that people lead different lives, and because of the strength of this body is that everyone comes from a different background, at different life stages, that we can make decisions that reflect our communities. Councillor Kent.
Thanks, Chair. I thought I should chip in because I realised I would be actually a breacher of the rules. As a new member, I had COVID the first meeting. The second meeting I couldn't make for work. This is actually only my 4th meeting, so it means my current official attendance is 33%. So if we were to pass the 50% rule, the clerk would have to write to Bristol City Council asking for me to be removed. But I did just check my attendance at Bristol City Council just to find if I am a terrible councillor. And I'm only on 90% at Bristol City Council over my period of being a councillor. So I just think it gets quite complex the more you try to build this in. So I think simply encouraging good attendance, but having certain safeguard triggers, which the clerk has tried to put in, seems a reasonable approach. I perfectly understand the point about, I mean, attendance should be way above 50% in reality if you commit to an authority. But I just think, as is written, seems reasonable. And ultimately, we don't actually have a formal sanction against councillors' non-attendance for this authority. So it seemed to me a reasonable way forward. I thought I just should fess up, though, that I seem to have breached every single one so far, but hopefully I can get that figure up over the next few months.
Thank you. If it's okay, because I'm just conscious I haven't finished presenting my paper, because we've sort of launched into the chapter. So if I can quickly finish that, and then we can take any final questions. So on page 80 of your bundle, I just commented on recommendation 7, where I've confirmed that we have introduced a new electronic process for signing contracts with DocuSign. We have licenses, I think 6 license users, mainly in the procurement department. And then finally, page 81, recommendation 12, training and development for officers who report to members. So this has taken the shape of a couple of different types of training. So we did some top-up training on modern.gov, which is a system we use for writing reports, because some people hadn't managed to make the first training that we provided. And then we've also run some training from South West Council. So that was one on how do you structure a report and how do you approach report writing, and the other one was working in a political environment. So those two training sessions took place in September and October this year. So at the moment, what I'm saying is I believe this recommendation is complete for this training year. Obviously, we've introduced this new training. I am going to develop a training plan going forward. So every year, I will have a formalised training plan for members and also for staff who interact with members. So I'm regarding this as now business as usual. It's on my to-do list alongside the corporate forward plan for all your reports. So I'm happy to conclude that I've done what I need to do for this report. So I think that's it. I'm delighted to say, because there are a lot of appendices there. So if we go back to the recommendations, and subject to any other questions you might have, I'm asking you to note the completion of the recommendations of the Independent Governance Review and approve the amended or new chapters of the Constitution at Appendices 1 to 8. But I have noticed for Appendix 6, Councillor May has suggested that we add a name of, or names of elected members as a point of contact in the whistleblowing policy. So subject to that, I hope you're happy to approve the chapters as set out at Appendices 1 to 8. And then over the page, I'm asking you to delegate to me, in consultation with the Chair, the ability to make minor changes to correct any errors that I spot as I bring this all together. So, sorry, it was a bit of a mammoth paper that. I apologise. Any other questions before we go to the vote?
Ron?
Very quick one with regard to Paul's recommendation. Should it be named people or should it be position? Should surely be position.
I think just named, you know where I'm coming from. Yeah.
Could I make a suggestion, Councillor May, that perhaps rather than names, because members change around and we'd have to refresh the constitution each time, perhaps if there is a wider group, such as the group leaders of a political party, that gives somebody a particular choice of who they might want to approach, is perhaps an alternative suggestion.
Can I just make another suggestion that is Karen's area? Can I have Karen's opinion on this, please?
I agree with the Chief. I think it should be a position, and I think for me the thought process around it was whoever somebody feels most comfortable to approach. So I absolutely accept your point that it was left very loose and that might not be helpful, but the main intention is to make sure that anybody who has a whistleblowing concern and they haven't been able to raise it through all of the other mechanisms can go to any member of the Fire Authority to raise that. So I think we could make a recommendation that it's the chair or the vice chair, but it should be maybe left fairly open.
We could add wording perhaps, because there's a on our website. Again, so on our website there's a list of all the members of the Fire Authority and their contact details, their email addresses. So I think we can link it in that way to make sure, as Karen says, then if you feel most comfortable approaching a particular member, you can do so. So we don't clip people's wings, maybe. But anyway, are you happy for us to work on that? Yeah. Offline, thank you.
Okay.
Any final questions? No.
Opposed, Chair. Proposer, seconder. Jane. Okay. Any votes against?
Thank you. Any votes against? Any abstentions? Votes for? Brilliant.
Yeah. I'm going to lay in a darkened room now.
Okay, item 10 is the Treasury Management Strategy Review, April 24 to September 24. Verity?
Thank you. Yeah, so this paper starts on page 165 of your bundles, and as the Chair says, it's the Treasury Management Strategy Review, so it's for the first 6 months of this financial year. So members will recall that we present the Treasury Management Strategy as part of the budget setting process and all of those papers that come in February time. So the Treasury Management Strategy was approved by the Fire Authority in February earlier this year. This is the first time we've brought a paper like this to the Fire Authority. So SIPFA recommends that we should review and inform members of our Treasury management activities and performance twice a year, once as a half-year review and then once post-year end. So this is the first time we're bringing you a half-year review to ensure that we are in line with best practice. If I can draw your attention to the top of page 166 and the financial implications section. So this section really just talks you through the capital programme that was approved as part of the budget setting process. So just over £34 million of spend across a 3-year period, and the fact that we needed significant, or we do need significant financial prudential borrowing to fund that capital programme. Paragraph 4.2 just highlights that we revised the capital programme ever so slightly, and that was presented to the Policy and Resources Committee in October this year for approval. That revision really just changed the total capital spend across the 3 years just by £3,000. So it was a very minimal change in terms of overall spend, and it was just revised to take into account the outturn of 23-24. What we did do as well is change the assumption slightly on the funding, and it meant that prudential borrowing actually is required slightly later. So the initial capital programme that was approved as part of the budget setting process assumed borrowing would be required from towards the end of this current financial year, so 24-25, but actually that revised programme now expects borrowing to be required from early 25-26. Paragraph 4.3 just outlines the current capital spend for the first 6 months of the year, just to highlight to you where we are. So for the first 6 months, we've spent just over £2 million against a forecast full-year spend of £5.5 million. Moving on to section 5 of the paper, this really just talks through the key elements of the Treasury Management Strategy and where we are, what's happened in the first 6 months of the year in relation to those areas. So the first section that we talk around is the borrowing strategy. The key thing here to pick out, which I've already sort of mentioned, is that the Treasury Management Strategy set out the intent to borrow over the 3-year period of the capital programme because we need to borrow in order to fund that investment. So that intention has not changed. We have not currently taken out any borrowing, which was as expected for the first 6 months of this year. And what we have done, as I've said, is slightly revise that capital programme in light of a change in funding assumptions. So now, paragraph 5.4 at the top of page 167 just highlights that the total borrowing for the current capital programme is expected to be just under 29 million, so 28.8 million there, and commencing early next financial year. There is one appendix to this paper on page 171, and that is an economic interest rate forecast. So it's an update that's provided to us by Bristol City Council, who provide us with certain financial services. They are not advisors to us, but they do have some advisors who provide this information. On that appendix, the table at the bottom of the appendix is an interest rate forecast, and that's the one that gives us a bit of an idea of what the expectation is for borrowing rates over different periods of loans with the Public Works Loan Board, which is where we would be looking to fund our investment in the capital programme. So that's something that, whilst it hasn't materially changed from the Treasury Management Strategy that was presented to you earlier this year, is something that we will keep an eye on as time progresses and we get closer to that borrowing requirement. At the bottom of page 167, we start a section on prudential indicators. So again, as part of the budget setting process, we set prudential indicators, and they are really our self-imposed affordability limits. So what we say is affordable, prudent and sustainable for us in terms of borrowing. Those prudential indicators are reviewed quarterly and presented to the Policy and Resources Committee. So again, paragraph 5.12 just highlights that there was a review done of those prudential indicators in the October meeting of the Policy and Resources Committee. And that review confirmed that there were no breaches of the prudential indicators during the first 6 months of the year and no expected or concerns of any breaches for the remainder of this financial year. And that's all around the fact that our borrowing is in line with expectation. And actually, if anything, the total borrowing is slightly lower across the 3-year period and expected to be slightly later. The next two sections are borrowing in advance of need and debt rescheduling. Really, these paragraphs are just highlighting that we haven't borrowed in advance of need and we haven't rescheduled any debt, so we've not done anything in those areas in the first 6 months of the year. And then the final section is the annual investment strategy, starting on page 168. But if I can draw your attention to page 169, paragraph 5.18 talks about our current investment strategy. So we again use Bristol City Council for various financial services, and one of those is to invest our day-to-day cash balances as part of their pool of accounts. So this paragraph just highlights that we've earned, on average, around just under 5%, so 4.9% on our day-to-day cash balances through the work that Bristol City Council do for us. And that then paragraph 5.19 talks about how we have not made any investments with any other counterparties outside of that day-to-day cash management. And that's something that the annual investment strategy highlighted when it was approved earlier this year, that we wanted to maintain a degree of liquidity to cover cash flow needs, and we haven't really got spare cash to do any other investment to make any other investments. So really, in summary, this paper is bringing to you our treasury management activities for the first 6 months of the year, and actually, as you can see, they've been relatively limited. We haven't made any investments, we haven't taken out any borrowing at the moment. So everything that we've done is in line with expectation, and there's no significant changes to the treasury management strategy that was approved earlier in the year. This is something that will come to you now on a 6-monthly basis, and actually, as I've mentioned, we're getting closer to the borrowing requirement, and so this will become a slightly more interesting paper in future, where we are starting to take borrowing out and making sure that we're in line with those prudential indicators and in line with our strategy. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? I was going to say, you've almost done them all, Verity, but Selina.
Seriously, I'm just asking for a bit of help with acronyms. Sorry, Sonia, if you have an acronym, would you mind spelling it out? Because I'm not probably as financially literate as you.
Apologies, yes. Yes, so that's an overnight index. I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly what it is either, but it's an overnight index that they use to kind of assess the interest rate that they give us on our bank balances, but absolutely, we'll make sure we do that in future.
Any further questions?
Just for noting.
Just as always, a huge thanks to Verity and the team for putting that together. That takes us to item 11, which is a HMIC FRS feedback following the revisit into service in September 24. Ian?
Thank you, Chair. The HMIC FRS revisit services where there are causes of concern periodically. And the paper before you today is an update on the latest revisit that we've had. The revisit took place in the first 2 weeks of September. It was a mix of meetings with various individuals, both face-to-face and online, some focus groups, some reality testing on some hold time and on-call stations, and some desktop reviews relating to site-specific risk information and home fire safety visits. I guess picking out some of the highlights that are in the outcome report. So inspectors said that firefighters have found the risk information that's now provided through the SSRI to be very useful. They were very positive about the new mobile data terminals that they access the information through, and they were also very positive about the training that they'd received in carrying out those visits. HMI also recognised that we've improved our strategic oversight and also found that our quality assurance processes are effective. There was also some recognition in there of the work done by the SSRI team and our whole-time firefighters and some wider staff members. It's been an enormous piece of work. More than 600 premises, or sites rather, have been visited in about 6 months, so it's a huge piece of work. In terms of our mobilising system, they found that was now stable. The diagnostic tool has been reintroduced and has remained stable through emergency calls. They recognised the regular meetings we're having with our third-party suppliers, working very closely with them whenever an issue arises, holding them to account in terms of response monitoring, the response times when we have issues. Staff were very positive about the fire control user group, so that's an opportunity for them to raise issues and concerns with managers and to get those resolved. The wellbeing team have now met with all of our fire control staff, and again they noted that we've improved our strategic oversight in terms of the issues when they do arise, and we have a weekly report. And I think the other thing I would say is that all of these measures will continue going forward beyond the HMI. In terms of prevention, we have a prevention strategy in place now. We also have a new risk stratification, which prioritises home fire safety visits for the most vulnerable people. We now have different timeframes around when a visit must take place based on that. Again, we've improved strategic oversight. There's detailed performance indicators that are monitored as well. And the training of crews, both whole time and on call, in carrying out those home fire safety visits are ongoing and close to being complete. They'll be completed by the end of the year. And we're also looking at a quality assurance process around those home fire safety visits as well. In terms of culture, the HMI recognised that culture change and improvement takes time. So the service has done an enormous range of things to improve the culture. Unfortunately, that's not reflected against the recommendations, but I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that there is an enormous amount that has been done, and that is recognised within the report as well. In terms of the recommendations, so there were 20 recommendations made against the 4 causes of concern. And in terms of the narrative in the outcome letter, there isn't a summary of how we've done. It's all within the body of the text. So within the paper, there is a table which summarises the progress that's been made. So the mobilising system accelerated cause of concern has been discharged, along with the 3 associated recommendations. The other causes of concern do remain open, but 2 of the recommendations in the SSRI cause of concern have been closed, and 3 in the prevention cause of concern. So 8 of the 20 recommendations have been closed and 1 discharged this time around. In terms of some of the actions in our action plan, some of those were not due to be complete before the revisit, so we expected some of those recommendations to remain open while we continue with that work. And we're also revisiting the action plan that's left to see what more we can do around some of those improvements. But overall, the outcome is, from the 3rd revisit, I think very positive. There's lots of positive narrative in the report, in addition to those recommendations being closed and the discharge. And we look forward to the inspectors coming back in sometime in the new year to look at the next part of our improvement journey.
Thank you, Ian. Any questions? Councillor May.
Chair, at the Policy Committee, I registered my concerns about the inspection. I'm pleased to see that a lot of progress has been made, but genuinely, as a member of the public, I'm genuinely concerned about this report still. It does leave lots of issues. 12 of the items are still left open, and of the causes of concern, 3 of those are still open. So it is something, I think, as a councillor, I've got to register my concern about this report for the Fire Authority. And I'm not being personal in that, because I know everybody's working really hard, but it is an issue that, external to this authority, looking at it, it really does still look really a cause of concern.
Thank you, Councillor. What I would say to that is that obviously we are here as a scrutiny body, and we're here to scrutinise the work of officers up and down the service, whether it's from the senior leadership board down to any of those reports to this body. So, you're quite right in terms of your putting on record your position. As a member of the public, you're fully entitled to offer your opinion in terms of how we are doing as a service, and I would always encourage that from members to express themselves, both in meetings, because HMICFRS do watch these meetings, and also in private to officers. At the same time, we are all working together in one direction to achieve what we want to hopefully see is us discharged from this. And I'll be honest with you, in terms of me attending those meetings and talking to the head of HMI, I don't know when that will be. But we are making the progression that I think that we need. Whether we're at the stage where everyone is happy in terms of that level of progression, we will hope to get there one day. But yeah, you are quite right in terms of expressing your opinion to this body.
And Chair, not wishing to undermine the work that is being undertaken, and I know the Policy Committee will keep on top of that. So I don't want to downgrade all the efforts that are being put in, but it is actually still an issue of concern for me. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think until we are fully discharged, it will be a concern to everyone here, both officer and member alike. But I don't think that negates the work that our officers and actually the authority in general in terms of the investment is put in terms of this response to get us out of that position. Any further questions? Paula?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to offer some assurance to yourself, Councillor May, and other members. I've taken over leading the service improvement team, and I'm working closely with Ian and Karen, who forms part of the DICE team. And what we're looking at is really embedding what's called the fire standards a bit more into our service improvement. It'll help give us some direction, and it has proven to be successful in other fire and rescue services. So we'll keep you updated on that, but I really want to give you some assurance. It's a slightly new direction, it's a slightly new tact, but we're hoping we will see some positive outcomes from that.
Councillor Goggin? Wilcox, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So I know I'd like to thank the Fire and Rescue Service for the progress that they've made on these items, but I am concerned that that this isn't labelled as a continuous review process. I think it would be a crying shame if we were to actually go back on a closed item, so I'd like some reassurance that we will be revisiting those items and making sure that we're up to scratch. And I'd also like to comment on the fact that none of the items about promoting the values and culture have actually been closed. And I've been on the Fire Authority for nearly 48 years now, and this has always been a concern for the Fire Authority. And I take Paula's statements about how they're actually changing, but this must be the priority for the Fire and Rescue Service, and we really do need to change the culture of the Fire and Rescue Services so it is one of equality and diversity and respects that.
So one of the, in response, first and foremost, to those that are closed, Councillor, is one of the decisions or the deciding factors to close some of those recommendations from HMI is sustainability going forward. And they absolutely look around whether or not that is embedded into the organisation. And that's the purpose of part of their assessment in relation to their satisfaction that it won't return again in the future, or is less likely for it to return again in the future. And we've made sufficient progress to ensure that it's become part of business as usual. And I regularly go back and only this morning I've had a further conversation with our HMI as well this morning, so I have regular engagement with them about some of their findings from their last inspection to seek to understand more. I also can reassure you that it has been my priority and that of the Service Leadership Board around promoting the right values and culture. But as by admittance by the HMI in their recent revisit, they acknowledge it takes time, but they've also acknowledged some of the interventions that have taken place and the effort that's taken place, and that there's potentially a time lag between an intervention and reality as well, which I recognise within that time lag, but certainly it is ongoing conversation for seeking to understand, because it is a priority. To assure you, it is a priority in relation to values and culture and ED&I. And in fact, since I've come into post as your Chief Fire Officer, I've increased the size of the ED&I team by well over 100%. That's the importance that we've put onto it, which is, I know, a significant challenge when we've got quite tight budgets anyway, but it's needed to be invested. And in fact, investment of Karen, who present later on, is an example of that, where we've put some strategic leads within that area. I
think it would be fair to say that we've taken a stand from this authority in terms of the culture that we would like to see, and I think the Chief Fire Officer fully understands our position on this. It's also at the last fire performance oversight group that I attended, Andy Cook, the Chief HMI, made the point that actually sustainability is one of the long-term key aspects of this, because and hopefully Andy doesn't quote me on this, but I think his words were he doesn't want us to come out of engaged and then slip back in, and that's the position not just for Avon but for all the fire services that are currently under investigation. And in this position is that actually the sustainability is the key factor in the decision making process, to making sure that actually if we do come out that we don't slip back in. I would rather stay in there for a little bit longer and make sure that we create that and embed that change that we need to ensure that we never go back in again. Caller.
Thank you. Just really to offer some further assurance, one thing we have recognised is sometimes we've maybe closed actions down thinking they were complete, and then it hasn't come to fruition when we've been inspected, and some of this has been demonstrated here where unfortunately things haven't been discharged. So what we've done is we've set up what's called an internal improvement board, and that means that when people are closing actions, we're actually going to request a closeout report from them, and they will bring it to the board for further scrutiny, and that's sense check to make sure things have been done. In addition to that, around culture, we appreciate there is work to do, and we have started already a programme of visits, especially to stations, just to try and understand culturally the concerns and issues at every level of the organisation. But something else we've now put in place is we're building a platform to collate all that information, and it will really allow us to put in that data analysis and understand what the issues are so we can address them, and we're really getting that reality check throughout the organisation so we can assure ourselves we're doing the right things, and also feedback to people, because we do recognise that's another issue where sometimes people have asked questions we may not have fed back, so we want to make sure we are open, honest and transparent in everything we're doing.
Offering a little bit more kind of assurance, Councillor, is once we've completed what we believe we've completed the action plans for all these areas, we then invite our auditors. So we've had 3 of the 4 areas, once we think we're close, audited in relation to getting a fresh pair of eyes. And again, to substantiate what Paula said there, is sometimes where we are not seeing some of their gaps and maybe signing something off. So again, it's a further assurance. Is it doing exactly what it says on the tin? Is it that sustainability aspect? And having that fresh pair of eyes from an audit perspective also either reaffirms that or identifies areas that we need to strengthen.
Thank you, Simon. Any further questions? No. Okay, so that report is for noting. That takes us on to item 12, which is the service response to the HMIC FRS thematic report, the handling of misconduct in fire and rescue services, and Karen will lead on that.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Is it still morning? No, sorry. So this report updates you on the thematic report, the handling of misconduct in the fire and rescue services. So this was released to us on the 1st of August. I think it's important to note right at the outset, picking up on the conversation we've just had, that this is a national report based on the fire service sector. It is not specific to Avon Fire and Rescue Service, but obviously the recommendations within it pertain to us, and we're looking at how we respond to all of those recommendations. HMI visited 10 fire and rescue services. We weren't one of the 10, and they also surveyed all of the, or gave the opportunity for all staff to respond to the survey. I understand that we had less than 50 responses within Avon to that survey, so this isn't really representative of our culture journey and our staff feedback, but it is very important for us to take note of these recommendations. I'd like to, obviously the recommendation is for you to note the content of this report, but I'd like to assure you again really that the primary purpose is to give you the assurance that officers are progressing the recommendations. We are reviewing the actions taken to ensure they are appropriate and, most importantly, embedded. This isn't about just making sure that we complete an action by the deadline and then sign it off. It is making sure that it's understood and embedded across every part of the fire and rescue service. It's also about making sure we've got the governance arrangements in place. So as Assistant Chief Lyons just mentioned, we have an improvement register where we capture all of the actions and the progress against those. We also have the internal and the service improvement board. And I would like to thank the service leadership board for designating me to the role of culture change manager. My role on this project is to lead, coordinate and monitor the progress. It's working with people services departments but also stakeholders across the organisation to make sure we're joined up and to make sure that these actions really do make a difference, not just within the service but that also the fire authority and members of the public have got confidence in us and in our culture. So the thematic report follows the release, as you may remember, of the Values and Culture Spotlight report, which was released in March last year. And at that point in time, I was assigned to lead to implement all of those actions within Avon Fire and Rescue Service. We've also been doing a huge amount of work on culture change, as the Chief alluded to earlier. Since I put 2017 in the report, but I think I've been here 18 years and we've always been working on culture. It's a never-ending process to make sure that we've fully embedded every aspect of having a positive culture and a diverse workforce, and that everything is inclusive and it's a positive workplace for everybody. So HMI have reported regularly on the need to tackle and improve the culture across the fire and rescue service sector. And we, upon receipt of this report, we met as a series of meetings with officers at senior level in the service to look at all of the recommendations and cross-reference those against both the recommendations that are contained within the Spotlight report and also the recommendations within our culture cause of concern. I think the good thing about that is that lots of these recommendations aren't new to us. They were things that we were already doing and that we had fully embedded across the service, but it was a good piece of work to be able to go back and revisit those to make sure that we could assure you of the work that we were undertaken. So HMI, in terms of the key considerations, in terms of section 5 of the report, it says that there are the 15 recommendations are around misconduct cases and how they've been handled during the period 1st of April 2022 and the 31st of March 2023. HMI state that it is likely that the actual level of misconduct was higher due to the data reported because staff may feel afraid to raise the concerns. So this is why we're doing a huge amount of work. The whistleblowing policy that was presented to you earlier is making sure that staff have all of the avenues upon which to raise a concern, and that they have assurances that both their line managers locally will deal with things appropriately or their colleagues will support them, and that we've got all of those mechanisms in place to address those issues. In 5.2 of the report, it also makes reference to the watch culture. It says, very importantly, I think, that the watch culture can be a source of strength and support to staff. Obviously, our operational colleagues are conducting very difficult work within the community, and sometimes, you know, the watch culture is what is needed to help them get through that working shift or that working tour. However, sometimes HMI report that work cultures can become toxic and stronger reforms are required to address this. And I'd like to pick up on the point that Assistant Chief Fire Officer Lyons has just mentioned in terms of the visits that I've been conducting along with my team. We've visited nearly every watch now on our fire stations and all on-call stations, and I have been probably blown away really by the culture that I have seen and witnessed on all of our fire stations, in that it's a very positive culture. Yes, let's not recognise that we have got some issues. We have had some misconduct cases that we've been working through and making sure that we deal with them robustly and appropriately. But I think I want to give you that assurance that all of the data that I have, and also it's about making sure we're visible. So if people have got any concerns, that by us going out and talking to people out on those fire stations, people then know that they can come to us, that we're a safe pair of ears, that they can raise any concerns. So I really want to give you that assurance that the toxic cultures that are mentioned within the HMI report is not what I see and witness, but we are gathering all of that information to make sure that even if there are isolated cases, that people are confident in being able to raise those, and that most importantly they're supported at that local level. So I wasn't going to pick out all of the recommendations, because I say there's 15 recommendations and I've gone through them in detail. We've partially completed a number of them, so I'll pick out things like the Core Code of Ethics. That was they were released by the National Fire Chiefs Council in May 2021. We've done a huge amount of work around the Core Code of Ethics, but HMI have reported both within this report and also in our revisit that not everybody is fully aware of them and understand them. So we're doing some more training with line managers to make sure that people are fully aware of those and bringing them to life, so it's not just around citing what the Core Code of Ethics are, but trying to give things like ethical dilemmas to get people thinking, get that discussion going. So then the penny starts to drop. So for example, one of the Core Codes of Ethics is about putting our communities first, and that's what I see every single day, is particularly our operational crews and other staff are always thinking about putting the communities first. And so it's around really making sure that they realise what that means to them and how they're actually doing that on a day-to-day basis. And working really closely with our corporate communications team, and at the moment we've launched it today, an end-of-year review, looking back at all of the amazing work that has been done in Avon Fire and Rescue Service over the last year, and then linking some of that work to the Core Code of Ethics, so people start to make that link between the work they're doing on a day-to-day basis and the ethics. In terms of some other work that's been done by the Human Resources team, they're working on a probation policy. This is because HMI have recognised that sometimes poor behaviour might start from almost the early days of people's employment, and if you haven't got a really robust probation policy, you're not addressing it at source, and then you inherit some of these problems, and it can then become more difficult to tackle it later on. So that's something that has been picked up within the Human Resources team to make sure our probation policy is rewritten to capture those issues and make sure we address any issues of misconduct appropriately at those early stages of employment. We're also looking at the transfer and promotion process, and that has been reviewed to support the watching leadership culture. Sometimes I think we recognise that it can be difficult if you're promoted from within a team, so from a firefighter to a junior officer within the watch. That can present difficulties because you've been really, really close friends, you've bonded together over many years, and then you're moved into a managerial position. And not always, but sometimes that can present difficulties. So we're looking then at actually moving people to different watches, different stations to address some of those issues or concerns that might arise. We're also looking at improving the analysis of misconduct cases. We've done a lot of this anyway for a number of years. We've looked at those within Human Resources and within the DICE team and also with the Service Leadership team. But we need to get better at doing some of that analysis. So that's something that we're doing around the the Professional Standards Board, which has been set up, and they have a specific role to look at cases, look at lessons to be learned, and what should we be doing differently in the future. We've also rewritten the grievance policy, the whistleblowing policy that we talked about earlier. In terms of welfare provisions, which is paragraph 5.9 of the report, whilst we've had really good welfare provisions in place for many years, more work is required to encourage staff to access those provisions. Sometimes when we're sharing all of the different tools and access of support that people can have, they may feel those are a tick box exercise, that we're just going through the motions by offering some of that welfare support, and that they don't always understand the benefits of accessing those. And also sometimes there's some stigma of people asking for help. So it's around sharing some of the positive experiences. Again, I'm working with corporate communications, and lots of our colleagues really encouragingly are saying, actually, I've accessed counselling support and I found it really, really helpful. That wasn't the case many years ago. People didn't talk quite so positively about that. So it's around trying to share that information so that people really feel that there is that welfare provision available to them and that they should access that if they need it. In terms of misconduct appeals, at the moment we've had an appeal process which is normally a member of HR and one of our senior officers, and HMI are recommending that will be a panel approach in the future and not an individual or a pair of people. So this is something that the Professional Standards Board are looking at. They will have a role in hearing appeals, and the new discipline policy and process has been rewritten to reflect this. There's also the option to have an external member of the Professional Standards Board to sit on that panel, to really give that degree of independence and assurance that sometimes people feel that they may not have confidence in the outcomes of those processes, and that's something that has been fed back to us before. So this is hopefully will bolster some of the discipline process that has been in place. The in-house employment lawyer is also working with us to make sure that we do appropriate training for any officers that are involved in discipline processes and appeals. We've also talked about the sharing of misconduct cases. So we've done quite a lot of that previously, but additional work is being undertaken to make sure that learning is shared with relevant managers at all levels. So that's involving our middle managers as well, that sometimes station managers haven't always been involved. So we've involved senior leaders, but not always our station and watch managers. So it's making sure that we talk to them about some of the learning from these cases. So it's about maintaining the confidentiality of the individuals involved, but also making sure that they're aware of maybe how to identify some of these issues and to stop them occurring within their own stations and to have some of those conversations. So I'm meeting with station managers over the next few weeks to have those conversations with them and what could I do more to kind of help and support that middle manager team. The final section in my report from 5.12 onwards is all of the actions that we have already completed. So you will note that we've completed them well ahead of the deadline, but picking up on your point earlier, it's not just about ticking them and moving on. It's that constant revisiting those to see have they made a difference? Are they embedded? Do staff know about them? Do they recognise them as being a positive thing that has actually given them more assurance in the process to make sure it is a positive workplace for them? So I wasn't intending to go through the recommendations that were completed unless you have any questions at the end. And I just wanted to make reference to 5.18, which is the recommendation that we haven't fully started on, which is around giving the Chief Fire Officer to implement a process to ensure there is sufficient oversight and scrutiny of misconduct issues, including identifying trends, areas of potential disproportionality, and to provide regular reporting to the Fire Authority and identification of learning outcomes to prevent repeat behaviours. So that isn't something that we've fully embedded yet, but there's a lot of work that we've done that has underpinned this action, which includes the new misconduct case management system, the introduction of the Professional Standards Board, development of a People Services Data Dashboard, which Assistant Chief Fire Officer Lyons alluded to earlier. So that's around all of the data that we hold within the organisation, but we haven't brought it together previously, and all of the themes that arise, not just from the visits that we do, but also the Service Leadership Board invests a huge amount of time going out and visiting all of our workplaces, and it's around how do we pull all of that information together to make sure we capture those trends and then that we report them back to you so that you're assured that we're taking action where we should be. The Chief Fire Officer as well ahead of all of this work, commissioned an external review of misconduct cases in March 2023, and those results were reported back to the Policy and Resources Committee and the Service Leadership Team in July 2023. And again, we're constantly looking at all of the misconduct cases that we have and looking at how we can learn lessons from those. We also report cases of notes, they're serious or potential gross misconduct cases, through to HMI. And again, I have regular conversations with HMI inspectors when they come in to talk to them about how we've handled those cases and what we're doing to get better at investigating, giving that external scrutiny, so things like having external investigators to look at some of our more serious cases. So there's a lot there that I've whistled through. I didn't know whether you've got any questions for me.
Councillor May? Chair, I really wish to congratulate the Chief Fire Officer for implementing these changes, because I think having just been critical, it is important that we actually do see this as a really positive report. Thank you, Kate, for that. The only thing I would perhaps suggest is the report is for noting. Could we actually make sure, because we deal with the HMI report at Policy and Resources, can we make sure that we actually pick this up at the same time, where we can perhaps go into a little bit more detail rather than the whole Fire Authority today? Because I think it would be worthwhile just making sure we pull the two things together, because it is relevant to the response to the HMI report.
Yeah, I just wanted to avoid double reporting. So obviously there is work involved in preparing every report. We could certainly put it in the agenda again for PRC, but I wouldn't want to task Karen to divert her resources from working to writing yet another report. So, of course, we could add it to the agenda.
Councillor Goggin.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Karen, for that. And it's just an observation, really. It's not about misconduct, but it is about your welfare provision. And it's a pretty open secret that over the years I've struggled with my mental health and living with bipolar and complex PTSD. And because it was impacting my role some years ago on the authority, the service provided me with some external counselling through, I think it was Red Poppy, which was, really, really helpful. And I just feel that although we've highlighted about the culture in the service, in the previous item and in this, I do believe there's a kind of like, it's almost like a family. I wouldn't like to compare it to the mafia or anything, but it's, people seem to be looked after, in my opinion, at least. So that's one part of the culture that I'm, really impressed and proud about. Thank you.
I'm going to make a comment, is that one of the great things that I get to do as chair is to visit multiple stations and meet watches and not only work with the SLB but also work with outside organisations like the Firefighters Charity, the FBU, and for me it's very difficult sometimes going into those meetings with HMI whereby there's that constant talk around culture and how negative we are in terms of how we are as a service. And for me, maybe it's just me, but I don't see that reflected in any parts of our service, whether it's those that are directly on the front line or those, in corporate in Portishead or any of our stations, whereby we have good people here. And I'll keep saying it, that they do amazing things day in, day out, regardless of their own state, but they're there to serve the public at the end of the day. So for me, the culture will always be an element in any large organisation. The more people you have, the more problems you'll have. Essentially, that's in corporate or in public service, or I guess even in the mafia. But it's and I think Councillor Hardy has taken on the position that he will take people out back and sort them out. I'm not condoning that, but at the same time, on a serious point, we have an excellent organisation and our culture is improving. We're not there yet, but we will get there, and it's because of Karen and the excellent work that the team are doing, is that we will eventually get there, and I think that's the important thing. And we as members, I think the best thing that we can do is not only attend these meetings and scrutinise, but actually go to our own stations and talk to the watches and make that opinion for ourselves, and don't take it for granted from either officers or myself or any other particular member. Do the research yourself and see just how good our people are. Any further questions for Karen? No? Thank you, Karen. So that was been noted.
Can I just mention, we did start late. We are now running very late. We only have one more paper. Are members content to keep going just to finish the meeting and have, or are people desperate for a comfort break? I just thought I ought to check.
I think we can get through one last item, can't we? Yeah. Okay, item 13 is the Grenfell Inquiry Final Report. ACFO Lion.
Thank you, Chief. So this is the first report of a high-level overview of Avon Fire and Rescue Services' response to the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 2 report. Regards recommendations, the Fire Authority is asked to note the contents of this report and make any recommendations to support us in achieving our vision of providing the highest standard and best value service to the community. So just to give some background, this was the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 2 report, which focused on the causes as opposed to the Phase 1, which was more around the factual narrative. And we would just like to put on record at this point, we still would like to acknowledge and remember the 72 people that sadly lost their lives back in 2017. So of this report, there were 58 recommendations, and this is an early gap analysis so that we can plan for the future with the Avon Fire and Rescue Service. Of the key considerations, the focus remains on Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 1 recommendations and our commitment to Phase 2. And we'll also consider the horizon scanning and planning for the future, but we will recognise the built environment, societal changes, advances in technology, future funding and our economic landscape. So if we move to page 186 and starting at 5.3, which is the recommendations, I've summarised these, and the most recommendations were actually for the local authority. However, whilst there was no recommendations for the London Fire Brigade, there were some criticisms, and these were largely aimed at the failure to integrate the control room, the failure to ensure adequate training for the control room, and to implement lessons learned. And this was in addition to there being, or perceived to be, an adoption of an insular approach and reluctance to learning from others. So whilst we recognise these criticisms were aimed at London Fire Brigade, we do acknowledge that they could be applied to any fire and rescue service, including ourselves, and hence our commitment to doing this early gap analysis and learning. So if we move forward, further recommendations were around the Government and Building Research Establishment, or BRE, and in consolidation of points 5.7 to 5.11, these broadly covered missed opportunities from the government, approved document B being misunderstood, previous coroner's recommendations not being treated with urgency, and an inadequacy of testing and the scope of advice. The gap analysis was largely subjective, and of the 58 recommendations, it was noted these would largely be impacting on service delivery. Other recommendations within that, included in 5.14, were around communications, radio use and operational learning. Just like to point out the reason for the subjectivity is because unlike some of the thematic reports or other reports we've had, such as the one referenced by Karen earlier, the recommendations, although explicit, they didn't have explicit timelines and the implications might not be known for some time yet. So moving forward to page 188, starting at 5.17 and continuing with recommendations, it was noted that greater importance is recommended to be placed on fire engineering as a discipline. And we recognise the impacts for ourselves regard succession planning for fire engineers in the service and the subsequent financial implications and those on continual professional development. 5.18, there were calls on the government to reform the Civil Contingencies Acts of 2004, and again we recognise implications in respect to training and changes in agreed practice and process which we already undertake. And finally, 5.19, it was noted that the control room should be at the heart of every fire and rescue service, and whilst I'm pleased to say that since the writing of this report, we have seen our cause of concern around mobilisation discharged. We are cognisant of this as we consider a possible move into Severn Park in the following years. In terms of risks, these are noted against our corporate risk register in 6.2, but of note, the significant one is the corporate risk 18.3, failure to identify or implement learning from events, and we note the risk rating could be increased if we do not address this gap analysis. At 7.1 on page 189, there are legal implications around our statutory duties should we not undertake the recommendations made. So since this report, the detailed gap analysis has been shared with directors and it has now been passed to Service Delivery Support, which is Assistant Chief Fire Officer Welch's department, and they will now take on these recommendations to make sure they are implemented and ensure that governance and oversight is applied. So just to confirm the recommendations, can I please ask that the paper is noted for contents and any recommendations are offered to support us in achieving our vision. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Paula, for your report. I did note that you said a lot of the recommendations were actually aimed at the unitary authorities that were involved in Grenfell. So my question is, are you getting enough support from our unitary authorities, which we actually represent, to do the, CR2 2.4 about lack of suitable controls to support the building regulations process? So are you getting enough help from us as councillors in that respect?
Thank you. I think the Chief is going to answer that, but that is forming part of our gap analysis. That's why it's been handed over to Service Delivery Support to do that deeper dive and really understand what we need, because it will inform our resourcing moving forward. So I can't answer that exactly at the moment, but it does form part of that deeper dive. I'll hand over to the Chief.
There are regular meetings with local authority, housing officers and teams that we have on a monthly basis for our protection teams in relation to in respect to the built environment. One of the areas that we are now starting to consider and focus. We've done high-rise buildings in Bristol as an example, and you'll be very familiar with the challenges around there, Councillor, I'm sure. But in respect to ongoing work, we have regular engagement. There has multidiscipline teams as well, which meet on a regular basis. We have an officer who is seconded into the building regulator as part of the MDTs as well. And our next phase of work is looking at medium rise, so 11 to 18 metres. In particular, letters that we've all had from the Deputy Prime Minister in relation to remediation orders and how we're moving those forward. Included in that conversation is the Weckham Mayor as well. So there's a lot of work that's going on in the background and start to gather pace and attention as well. So thank you.
Councillor Goggin.
Yeah, just a brief question on homemade electric bikes. Obviously, we had that tragic incident in Bristol where somebody lost their life. Do you know if there's any changes to legislation coming up, or what is the local authority response to yourselves about, the storage, the charging, and the potential risks involved? Because obviously it's an emerging thing that we didn't have 5 years ago.
Yeah, so we've been working with local authorities around community messaging more than anything. Legislation is a little bit more different. I'll come on to that in a moment. But certainly been working around community messaging. We've been working with community groups. Particularly, we just did a campaign with Deliveroo and engaging with their employees because many of their employees would use electric style transportation, namely an electric bike in the main, and particularly around those that the homemade devices that you might buy from a less legitimate source, as an example. So educating is where we've been at this moment in time and trying to give that consistent community messaging. We also do as a service our own social media campaigns. From a national perspective, we are part of a working group around how we would respond to lithium-ion batteries from a response perspective and also an education perspective also. And there have been a number of select committees and round table events more recently in relation to legislating the use of lithium-ion batteries. So there's a lot of ongoing work, but we're limited from an authority's perspective of how much we can do other than perhaps prevention, advice, unless it's within the built environment. And then, of course, that comes into the risk assessment with the building owner for things like storage of lithium-ion batteries, etc.
Any further questions? Councillor May?
Yes, Chair. There's a new legislation that has been proposed, a new bill, and I chair in Baines the Health and Wellbeing Board, and we supported that legislation, and we've got a report tomorrow from the Fire Authority to our Health and Wellbeing Board. So it is important that we actually do develop those links increasingly between the Fire Authority and the local authorities.
Any further questions? Okay, that report was for noting, which takes us on to item 14, which is the date of the next meeting is Friday the 14th of February 2025 at 10:30 here at Severn Park. Okay, so I'll look forward to seeing you all then. I will say that this is the last full meeting before Christmas, and I will say the C word. So if I don't see you, have a fantastic Christmas and New Year, and I'll see you all next year. Thank you.